So tell me, throughout the pandemic, we've seen record numbers of women leaving the workforce, especially women of color. One of the topics that your book addresses is how to navigate career breaks and address gaps in a resume.
Yes.
These sorts of gaps are typically seen as negative in the eyes of hiring managers, but the stigma seems to be changing. What are the most important steps that women of color should take to explain those gaps, and what should we avoid?
Well, the first thing I want to say is be proud of everything you have done over the course of your career, including any gaps you may have taken. And I say that with my whole heart. And I say that from experience of times when that has not been reflected back at me. Hiring managers are often looking to take the most minimal amount of risk. The stakes are really high when you're recruiting. Recruiting takes a long time. There's so many things to align. But trust me, there are very few people who have maintained a perfect career with zero gaps. Very, very few. So if you have taken a gap for whatever reason, do not feel that makes you a lesser candidate. Be proud of everything you bring to the table. And if your career gap was shorter than the total sum of your entire experience, it's a moment. It's a moment. And if anything, the reaffirmation that you have of what you want to do next and how you can apply your skills and what you can do for your next employer is what matters the most. That is what matters. So be proud of everything that you bring to the table.
Yes. And for those women who are jumping back into the workforce after a break, there's possibly some fear around salary expectation. Women of color are often underpaid and
Yes.
come into these conversations at a disadvantage. So how should we approach salary negotiations, and what are the do's and don'ts, and how does your book guide women through the process?
Yes. Salary negotiation is so important, regardless of your years of experience, regardless of whether you've had a career gap or not had a career gap, regardless of whether you're in a role looking for a next one or whether you're not in a role and looking for your next one. Salary negotiation is so important. It's important because of what you said. Historically, the pay gaps punish us the most. It was projected before the pandemic that it might take a century for women to close the pay gap before the pandemic. And we're still looking to see what the past 2.5 years, what the impact might be for us moving forward. So right now, here in this moment, we have to be our own best advocates. It's so important. I really would love for us as women, as peers to one another, to really normalize talking about money and sharing what we earn and being open to having those conversations. I recognize it's not always easy to turn to your coworker and ask them that conversation, but we are so fortunate in that there's so much data that we can have access to. There's companies that crunch data for this. Regardless of what industry you are in, I'd be willing to bet your industry association will have some salary data reports, or recruiters that recruit for your industry sector will have data and reports. And I really encourage you to do your homework. Do your homework, and also be really clear once you've done your homework and you know a range for your role and years of experience and where you're located. Be really clear about what you need to make. What's the number you need to hit to make everything worthwhile? And then if you're giving a range, the range starts there. And it goes up from there.
Yeah.
That's my advice.
Yeah, absolutely. When I work with women and I mentor them, I say, know your number. What is your number? And I love in the book where you said, know your worth. Like,
Yes.
it's so important to know your worth. But I find that's still a big challenge for women in the career sector and women entrepreneurs. They're afraid to state their number. Like, what is your hourly rate? What is your day rate? They're afraid to articulate that to, well, even if they found it and they've done the research, they're afraid to state it. What tips would you give for women. So they've done the research, right? They now know what their day rate is, but they're yet afraid to say it.
Keep practicing saying it over and over and over and over and over. If you know you're going into a meeting with your boss where maybe there's going to be a conversation about compensation or what you want to practice. If you're going into a meeting with a client, and say it with confidence. Say it with confidence. It's so important to do. And we have to believe in it ourselves, because there will be times when it's not reflected back at us. There will be a role where the salary doesn't align, or an opportunity where it doesn't align, or a client that can't pay that fee. There always will be. But if we don't know our worth, we are then relying on everyone else to reflect our worth back at us.
Yes, exactly. And I say it's okay to walk away. You state your number and it's not aligned with what you know your value is. It's okay to walk away as well.
Yes.
It's okay to walk away as well. We have a question in the chat. It says, does Octavia have any advice on how to overcome imposter syndrome, especially when negotiating pay? You sort of talked a little bit about that, but maybe even just on the imposter syndrome as well.
No, I do have some thoughts on that. And thank you, Emily, for asking that question. First of all, I recognize that unless you're an entrepreneur where perhaps you're talking numbers all the time, when you're an employee, you don't have these conversations very often. There are only so many times in your career where you're perhaps looking for a new role, or there's only so many times, it might be once a year, when you have your performance review, when you actually have a conversation with your manager about how much you're making. This isn't something that you're going to be doing on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So when you do it, not only do you not do it very often, the stakes are high, and it's incredibly personal to you. You know, this is you. It's your work and what you bring to the table. So what I advise is keep track of all of your accomplishments. And I don't say this just to have the proof points to justify your ask in the moment. I'm saying do this on a weekly basis for you, because guaranteed you will forget by the end of the month some of the things that you have done that you might not have put emphasis on. If you jot down your accomplishments, large and small, you will see by the end of a month, and by the end of a quarter, and after 6 months, and after a year, how much you are growing as an individual, how much your role is impacting your organization, and what a contribution you're making. Because it can be so hard sometimes when we're updating our resume or preparing for, a performance review, to really sit and think, okay, what have I done?